No, you're good. And
it could be any kind of tree you want. Just give me a second to warm up.
oh gosh, maybe one of you guys should wear this. Maddie gave me the idea to do like a little intro. So I don't really know what that is, and I'm going to give it a shot.
Do like a song. Welcome to Reed's podcast.
Welcome to the Reed Fletcher podcast.
Woo!
I'm here with myself, Reed Fletcher, hosted by myself, Reed Fletcher. I'm here with our sound editing engineer, Caitlin.
Hello.
So, wait, do you go by Caitlin Bell or Caitlin Fletcher or Caitlin Bell Fletcher?
I go by Caitlin Bell.
Caitlin Bell and Michael Fletcher.
Yeah. Which is, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, like, hyphenating last names and stuff like that. Because, like, my mom hyphenated her last name, but we all just have my dad's last name. And we've actually talked about hyphenating both of our last names. Okay, well, I thought we talked about it.
I dreamt about it one time, right?
Yeah, because, like, who is it? It's Zoe Saldana. Her husband took her last name when they had kids.
Oh, really?
Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And he's Brazilian, I think. So, like, it's very different customs in different countries that are not the United States, you know?
Yeah, I mean, here's an interesting question. I know this lady who her husband, so I think her husband, they got divorced, and it was really ugly.
Oh, like just messy.
Yeah, but she still has his last name like a decade later because her kids have that last name.
Yeah.
Which is weird to think of because now she still carries the last name of a guy who she like hates, but because it's weird to have a different last name than her kids.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, well, and like people get really weird about that too. Like schools will be weird about it. Like, what's your name? And it's like, oh, these are my kids. And it's like, no, well, but you don't have the same last name. And they get upset about it.
They can be so stingy about that kind of thing. Like at the airport, I've heard of this happening a lot with brand new married couples where they'll put for their like airport itinerary their last name for when they get married.
Yeah.
But then they don't legally change it. So it's like, hey, we got married yesterday. We're going on a honeymoon. Like, well, technically your airline ticket says this last name, but your license.
You're not Caitlin Fletcher. This is Caitlin Bell.
This
Spelled
doesn't look anything
stolen
like
an
you.
identity
and with Michael
here.
Fletcher, but these are clearly not the same people.
And they're so stingy about that. You know?
It's weird. I think we purposely, when we went on our honeymoon, we purposely put Caitlin Bell and Michael Fletcher because your dad knew something that I wasn't going to change.
He bought
my
the
last
tickets.
name. Yeah.
I don't know,
Russ.
the whole
Shout out to Russ.
the whole reason that exists, the patrilineal tracking, is because at least in olden times, you knew who the mother of the child was no matter what, whereas the father was in doubt.
Interesting.
Like, for instance, did you guys read the Odyssey?
No.
They make you read it in school sometimes, but you know the basic premise.
Yeah.
Odysseus gets put on a ship, blah, blah, blah.
Uh-huh.
A big part of the Odyssey is that Penelope, his wife back home, a lot of people are trying to marry her because Odysseus is the king of Ithaca, I would say.
And they think he's dead.
And they all think he's dead.
Yeah.
But she can't marry any of them, and she can't have any sex with any of them, because then it would put into doubt Odysseus's children, who they are, and who actually should inherit. Whereas it's fine for Odysseus to go out and have sex with Calypso or any of the other people he runs into on his journey, because it doesn't matter as far as inheritance is concerned.
Yeah, like lineage.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
That is interesting. I was actually reading today. Have you guys read Sapiens?
Not yet.
My friend was telling me a lot about it, and it seemed really interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't read it.
Well, I've said that very sentence like a million times too, because like everyone has been recommending it to me forever. And I started it like forever ago, and I was thinking, man, this is like too dry. I can't do it. And then finally yesterday, or when I was driving from Arizona or something, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to stick it to it. I'm going to listen to it. And one of the things they talk about is how back in the day, we didn't know that babies came from one man. Like, there was actually a belief for a long period of time that, because in a lot of societies, women had sex with like all of the men. They didn't know. They thought that it was actually encouraged that they had sex with more men because they thought that the sperm going in would make like a collective baby child. And you think about it, it's actually until basically, I mean, I don't know if modern medicine, but at least some types of, observation that we didn't have way back then. There's no real way to know that one baby is linked to one sperm,
Well, I think that also makes sense about the Western civilization obsession with virginity too.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, if you don't have sex with anyone except for your husband when you get married, then there's no question about whose baby that is.
Right.
But if anything else is like, whoa, hold up. Now we have modern science. So we don't really need to do it.
Yeah, it's kind of outdated.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see, like, very, like, I feel like that is like a world ideal from, like, ancient times or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's now a very American ideal, too, is, like, virginity is very, like, important. And I think it is in other countries, but I feel like in Europe, like, female virginity is very important. Yeah. Even though it's
backwards, but yeah.
It's just outdated because you could just go get a paternity test and it's not a big deal anymore. But
I don't actually know a lot about this, but I've thought about how much of basically the male-female sexual, I guess, bond is actually biological. And I wonder how humans compare to other animals. Because I know some species are more monogamous than others. But I mean, I'm pretty sure like chimpanzees have an alpha male who has sex with like all of the women.
Yeah. And
so his genes are like the only ones that get passed on. I wonder if we didn't have like social norms, or if we didn't have a religion, probably a big part of it.
Yeah.
How like sex would be perceived. Maybe we would have alpha males who are just, it's actually noble to have sex with a bunch of different women because all those women get to pass on the better genes or something. Or
I remember reading somewhere about the invention of monogamy by society was to prevent wars. Because any society that has excess males who are not having sex after a certain point, like a breaking point, they go to war. Because there's just too many of them and they're unsatisfied and they're angry or whatever. So they have to go conquer somewhere that has more women.
You need to release
attention. Whereas once monogamy became kind of part of culture and civilization, it was like everyone was allotted their woman, which is like a terrible way to think about it. The patriarchal dividend said, like, you know what, just stay in line, behave, don't go to war, and you'll get a wife. We'll hand out wives equally to everyone. Yeah. It's interesting.
And that's still, we were talking about this the other day, how that's still pretty prevalent. Not necessarily like, I feel like it's very unspoken. Yeah. But I feel like there's a lot of like incels like sitting in their basements like waiting for their wife to come because they went to school and they have a good job, or they paid the price. Yeah.
Well, and what they didn't realize is that women are people. Yeah. They're not currency. And so they're waiting for the other half of a transaction that a woman doesn't even know she's made.
I've heard this, and I don't remember if it was a theory or if it was the actual truth, so I'll leave it at that. But my marketing teacher was talking about this, and he was talking about how anciently a way that you showed that you were the best tribe was that like you would go and plunder another tribe and steal their things and steal their women. Mm-hmm. And that was like the most common thing. And then you could tell who was the best tribe because they had the best women, the most women, and the most stuff. Right? And then he says that there's a really like scientific word for it now. I can't remember what it is, but it doesn't matter.
Ancient Greeks called it kleos.
It's called like...
which means
doesn't matter.
It means tangible glory in Greek, I think. In the Iliad, they talk about how kleos is all that matters because it's visual, it's tangible, it's real. Right. You kill someone, you take their shield, or their wife, or their gold, and you're like, these are all the people I killed, and this is all the stuff I've got. Look how awesome I am.
Well, and so what they call it now, and it's a marketing term, is it's like, so we no longer go and plunder. We no longer go and like steal people's stuff and their women in their villages. So now we need to wear on our sleeves somehow the fact that we have status. And so that's why marketers focus so much on status with status goods. So it's like, oh, look how cool I am. I drive a Mercedes.
Rolex.
Rolex. And what does that basically imply? Especially if you have a hot wife and you have a Rolex and you have a big house, it's like subconsciously, look, I pillaged and plundered somewhere in my life and look what I've conquered. And it's kind of like a really weird way to think about it. And especially when we start to think about the things, you know, like it's a symbol to everyone else that sees you when you drive by in the nice car that you have the power to dominate them in a weird way. And it's so primal to people that they keep trying to do it to each other, and they keep like outbuying each other with things they don't even want because they want to give off the symbol to the other that they're the better and that they could pillage them if they wanted to.
It's really interesting that we're still doing it.
Lizard brain.
Yeah. But that like it's still the pangs, like even just the list that you were saying includes the hot wife, where it's like, these are my things.
Yeah.
And this hot wife is one of them.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know, I feel like we as a culture have really moved away from the idea that A, women are not people, and B, women are currency. But not completely. Like there's still these archaic values and traditions that are hanging on and refusing to die.
Well, and I feel like a lot of like thinking of a woman as an object or a reward has to do with sex, definitely, because how do you motivate people in general, but men specifically, is with sex. So if you say, oh, well, if you do it, like we were saying earlier, if you check all these boxes, then you can have this woman and she is there to have sex with you. And I feel like, I don't know where I'm going with this.
It's okay.
But like in like, sometimes, especially in religious cultures where, you know, like the 72 virgins you get after death or something like that, like you get all these women if you do this specific thing. It's
a really common thing. And I don't know if the word damaging is too strong, because I don't necessarily think it's damaging, because a lot of times we see through it now. But I would say incorrect to, I mean, a lot of people think that women are like they are like a symbol of the man. You know, for example, you see a guy with a really attractive woman. When you look at them, like let's say it's an ugly guy with an attractive woman. What do you think about the guy?
Yeah, you think, oh, what is he doing? What is he giving to the relationship that she likes?
Yeah, not just men. Women do it too.
Yeah, that's true.
You look at a couple and you say, he must be rich.
He must be rich, or he must
be funny.
He must be funny, or he must be smart, or he must be charming, or whatever.
Yeah.
Now flip the script on that, and it's like you see a really attractive guy with an ugly woman. What do you think about the woman? You don't ever think, wow, she must be smart. Wow, she must be really cool, or wow, she must be really this or that. You always think, wow, he must be really weird. Yeah. Even though he's good looking, he must
have low self-esteem.
He must have low self-esteem. He must be an idiot. He must be a drunkard, because
you hear that kind of stuff all the time.
And this is kind of my theory, is that I don't know how to say this. It's like women are more objectively like beautiful and attractive, and you can tell. And so guys, we just don't really know. And so we're like, we have to part of how we judge how attractive a guy is how attractive of a woman he's with. It's like as if a woman was attractive at this level, and the guy's like, oh, we have no idea how attractive the guy is. So if the woman's at this level, then the guy must be at that level. We'll fill in the blanks. Because for some reason, we judge guys off the women they're with, but we don't really judge women in the same way by the guys that they're with. You know?
I mean, I was just thinking about that whole thing we were talking about the other day, about how men are expendable in society. Where, like, way back in the day, like survival times, caveman, whatever, women were considered valuable because they can incubate a child, but it only takes one man to impregnate a village.
So you only need one man.
You only really need one guy, and as many women as you can, because at that point in history, children are assets rather than detriments.
Right.
And that means that any extra men, who cares what happens to them? And so, like, on this weird fundamental level, we've carried that through to our culture nowadays, where women hold this inherent value in everyone's eyes, but extra men are worthless.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if you're going to be a baby, if you're going to be weak or, like, easily scared or something like that as a child, and you're a girl child, you will be comforted. But if you're a boy child, you'll be told to suck it up. If you are going to go to college as a man in general, it'll be like, okay, you're 18 years old, get out of the house, good luck. Forge out on your own or die. Because we don't really care, but if you're the woman, stay home as long as you like, go to college to find a husband, like these weird undercurrents of like, we will take care of you and make sure that you're protected because you're valuable.
Yeah.
And if you're a man, be homeless, go to war, go to prison. Who cares? We've got plenty of men.
Yeah. Well, and women's inherent value comes from their ability to birth children.
Which is a terrible thought, but
Yeah.
it's like, if it was just the baseline, and you're not including anything else, women at least can have children, and men cannot. So you need to be extra special in order to be worth anything as a man.
Right. And if you're going off of that curve, it makes total sense that a guy is like, yeah, we could just get the best guy and have him impregnate all the
Everyone.
women. But we can't, like, a woman can only be impregnated at one time.
Yep.
Mm.
And it makes sense. That's why, I mean, a lot of, like, religion, even a lot of language in society it makes, like, birth and womanhood and all that very sacred. Mother Nature, Mother Earth.
Did you
Because it's true. Like, they are kind of the center of the universe as far as people go.
Like
Did you ever
creating
read
life.
the Wicked and the Divine?
No.
It's a comic book series.
Mm-hmm.
There's just really cool monologue in the middle of it by Woden, where he is talking about patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was I thought it was really eye-opening, where he's talking about how patriarchy is misunderstood by most people as rule of men, but that's not patriarchy. That's not even the Latin root. That would be andriarchy. Patriarchy is rule by fathers. And so he starts talking about how in every society, it's the old men who are ruling, not the young men. In fact, the young men are valued less than the women. They're sacrificed. Abraham sacrifices Isaac. Fathers will send their children off to war to die.
Their sons. Yeah.
Their sons, not their daughters. It was really interesting. He was just talking about how the whole thing is a little warped, because as much as modern feminism wants to fight against men, they really shouldn't be fighting against men who are their own age.
Mm.
The rising generations of men are getting the same raw deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's the older generation of men that should be the target of their attacks, I guess. Whereas if you were to target men your own age as a college-age woman, all you would be doing is creating an enemy out of someone who could be an ally.
Well, and I think like that's kind of radical feminism.
Right.
Yeah.
In its extremes.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I think is kind of an important distinction. Yeah.
Yeah,
like
definitely.
So we did a play a couple months ago called Chains of Dew, which is about birth control and women's rights in like the 1920s. And you guys came?
I saw it.
So it's kind of interesting.
I liked it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of weird to, I don't know, like think about how helpless women felt in that particular time period. But our friend said that she could not come because she doesn't agree with feminism. And I thought that was so... Yeah. She like bought a ticket to support us, but didn't actually come to the show because she doesn't agree with feminism. And this is our friend who like pole dances and is the primary breadwinner in her marriage and dresses however she wants to, which are all things that were laid down for her by feminism, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, she gets to speak.
Yeah.
That alone is given to her by...
What a broad statement. Like, not agree with feminism is a very...
Yeah. By, like, generations of women before.
Yeah.
Have earned her these rights that she takes and uses, but can't support feminism.
I thought about that. I remember when we saw that play, one of the things that I thought of was just how scary it must have been at that time to not have birth control, or before that time, you know?
Oh, God,
yeah. And since birth control, it's like really even the playing field as far as control, you know, where it's like, well, not totally, obviously, but like before that, it was like, I mean, if I decide to have sex with you, all of a sudden, like I'm risking possibly, you know, like this huge responsibility, and then the guy can just bounce.
Yeah, just leave.
And so
never see him again.
Like the vulnerability to be in relationships must have been so much higher before that. We're like, well, yeah, I mean, I hope he sticks around. And it's not like every guy runs off or anything, but just the fact that they have no way really of protecting themselves.
Which I think explains a lot of like modern marriage traditions, like especially in cultures that have arranged marriages, like India, where it's like, no, we're going to meet your family, we're going to meet your parents, we're going to know where you live, we're going to make this huge celebration, you guys are not allowed to be alone before this, and then after everything is 100% figured out, you guys can now have sex because we don't want you running off.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can we talk about your parents in this? I don't know.
It's up to you.
Are they going to watch it?
Maybe.
Well, your mom did say this. It's not like an ad.
It's not like putting words in her mouth. If
I don't know what you're going to say. So
there we go.
No, just when we got engaged, we were talking about waiting 2 years to get married because I wanted Maddie to be one of my bridesmaids and she wasn't going to be home in time.
Oh, yeah.
And then your mom was like, no, you need to get married now before he changes his mind.
Yikes.
And I was just kind of like...
Because he already gave it up.
Yeah, because, she was implying that since we had already had sex, nothing was holding us together. So
it's like a ticking time bomb from the first time you have sex.
Yeah, he's going to just...
Like, you have to marry him until that boner goes down.
Yeah.
Hey, Maddie.
What?
Exactly.
Maddie, you got to get in here.
Yeah, it was insane. Like, she said that to me and I was just like, it's 2016. What? You can just say that, I guess?
I guess.
Say whatever you want, I guess.
That is really funny. That is so funny. I heard something one time. It was in so bear in mind, caveat, this was in like some kind of advertisement for gum. Okay. But it was in a magazine, so it was probably pretty trustworthy. And it was talking about how something about how like men want to kiss women as fast as they can because I guess in their saliva they transfer testosterone to women, which makes it kind of seals the deal of their attraction more. Isn't that interesting?
Is that true?
I mean, as experiment.
I mean, I've read stuff. I've read stuff before that says that like kissing is like a transfer of your saliva is a transfer of your genes.
Oh yeah.
So like to tell if you are going to be compatible with somebody after you kiss them and kind of swap DNA, someone will taste gross or smell weird, and that's your body letting you know do not have a child with them. It's like a little quick test to see if you guys are going to be compatible. Where like if you have varying blood types or histories of mental disease or something, it's going to come out in this little tiny test, but you're not going to get the actual results. It'll just give you the warning.
It's not 23andMe.
You know what I mean, though? And there's a similar thing
like,
with...
Is that a little bit of Ecuadorian in there? I sense a little bit of Latin spice.
Or what was that? An Ashkenazi Jew that Scotty had?
Yeah, like randomly.
Yeah. Or another thing is smell. So like when someone smells bad to you, especially like their BO or like their normal smell, it's a lot of the time I think it's your body telling you that you're not sexually attracted to them for a good reason. Because there's something incompatible in your genes.
Well, it's kind of weird to me to think about how many things, especially once you've had sex, you think back on like when you were a teenager and like the advertisements you looked at and the way you dressed. Like, wow, like so much of my life was centered around and guided towards getting me sex. It's like, you know, like we snuggled in a certain way and it was like mimicking sex in 7th grade. It was like, we held hands and it's like, oh, her flesh, like all those weird things you don't realize when you're a kid.
Flesh?
Like, you're like, oh, the human connection, like the way she smells in her hair. Like,
I thought you said flesh, like her face.
No, not her flesh, her
flesh.
I don't know which is worse.
I'm going to make a suit out of her, you know? Everyone thinks that, right? On their first date, like, I wonder what she looked like as a human skin suit. Like, that's normal. I thought that.
We found Buffalo Bill. Please come get him.
I locked the doors when you guys came in.
There's a very real phenomenon that talks about a loss of motivation from men after losing their virginity a lot of the time, and women, but more in men, especially in like a monogamous partnership where it's like, oh, I went to parties to meet girls to have sex. I got my job so I could have money so that I could meet girls and have sex. And like, this is like your final end goal. And then finally you do get sex and you're married and or dating or whatever. Yeah. And you're like, go out. Why?
Wait, yeah. What are you talking about?
Stay here and watch a movie.
The only reason I went to the gym was so that I could have sex with you.
But it's a real thing. It's
and
very
now we're
real.
good.
It's like I went to the gym.
I got it.
I went to the gym for years and now like I'm good.
That is so
you need
real.
to find like a different internal motivation for that stuff. And especially like younger men, like in your teens, hormonally you're just driven by sex so much.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, not only do I feel like you're driven over a time period, like I'm going to go get a college degree so I can get a good job so I can have sex. Yeah. But I actually even believe...
Your 10-year plan is motivated by sex.
Well, that's the same...
Like, you just don't notice.
That's the same patriarchal dividend thing we were just talking about, too. Where somewhere in your mind, you've come to the conclusion that if you do X things, you will get your own woman to have sex with.
Yeah.
Like, just the statement you just made is really interesting because it's like, oh, I'll go to college and get a good job because this will guarantee me sex and that's what I want.
And I think most people don't admit that.
No.
Just how
it's a subconscious kind of thing.
Like when you play the why game, you're like, well, okay, why are you studying? Oh, because I want to get grades. Why do you want to get grades? So I can get a good job. Why do you want to get a good job? You keep going down. It's like, so that I can feel successful. Like, why do you want to feel successful? So that people will love me. Why do you want to be loved? So that I can be close to a woman and I can love her and then we can have sex. It's like this
weird base for a lot of human action.
Yeah.
And I think when you can step away from that as an individual, it's a lot healthier in your life.
Yeah.
Like when you can kind of let go of that and be like, wait a second. I actually like working out. I'm just going to go to the gym because I like it.
Or I actually like this woman. Like I want to sit here. You know,
I don't just want to bone her.
That's actually a big step. Like I actually, like I'd heard this before, and it was very true. That's like the feelings you have right after you have sex with a woman really tell you how you feel about them. Because like right after you have sex with a woman, like you're the least turned on, right? At least as far as like your drive, because it's a release, right? And then all of a sudden, like you still want to be with this person is actually pretty telling of your relationship.
But if you feel ashamed
or embarrassed, or
immediately get up and leave,
or like, oh, how long do we have to snuggle here? Like something like that, like those tropes. I think that's a signal of, oh, my mind was overtaken by my drive for sex. And once I got it and like finally the veil was taken, I'm like, what have I done? You know? But after you do it and then you feel really close to someone, like, oh, I actually really love this person. It wasn't because of the sex. Like, I feel I want to be with them regardless. You know?
It's also really interesting, I think, like when guys ask you, like an editorial you, what they can do to get like better with women, like to get better with the ladies. Like, oh, I think you're smooth or whatever. I want to learn how to do that. And it's like, why don't you just try being friends with a woman first?
Right.
Like, I
why
have a
don't
friend.
you try treating her like a real person?
Yeah, who will not be named. You know what I'm talking about.
Why don't you imagine she's a man and just like you're sitting next to a man and you're talking to a man
and you're not trying to
about
have sex with them.
Normal things. That's like one of the biggest pieces of advice. Like I remember
it's
when I was young,
obvious. It should be obvious.
What do I say? Like I'm with a girl and it's like, all I wanted to talk about was the fact that I was a guy and that she was a girl. Like all the conversations were like, so what's it like being a girl? Huh? And
you know,
like
it's pretty cool to have a dick. What's it like?
And
just whip it out.
And like, yeah, I don't know. Like being a girl would suck. Like you have to like shave your legs. Like that was the kind of thing in junior high. Every conversation with girls was like just pointing out the fact that they were girls. And then as soon as for whatever reason I got over that, it's like I can just talk to girls. Girls know about more stuff than just being a girl. It's like
it turns out they're people too.
And like turns out girls like books and movies and they have friendships and pasts and you know like
feelings.
They have family and they like have hobbies.
Ideas.
What's really weird though.
Exactly. And then you're like you can actually connect with someone.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you're just talking about mutual interests rather than like, what's the fastest way for me to have sex with you?
Yeah.
How
long is this going to take?
I've said most of the questions I planned.
It's really interesting.
Oh, no. For real.
They stay in that mindset. And, like, you cannot explain to them fundamentally. They have to come to their own conclusion. You can tell them as many times as possible. Be like, Just talk to them like they're a normal ass person.
Oh yeah, what were you gonna say? Like our friend.
Oh, I think he doesn't actually like women. Like he doesn't have any friends who are girlfriends. He doesn't.
I'm trying to read.
He can't get along with women. And then he wants to have sex with them, and so he has like this horrible, miserable dating experience.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know.
And and so it's like, just stop. Just take a step outside of yourself for a second, and just treat them like normal people. And if you actually like them, then maybe you could have sex with them, and they'll probably want to more.
I was just thinking about like my experience growing up as a woman. I felt like was very different from what other women would tell me that they were going through. Is because I just wanted to bone somebody and I wanted it now, and no one would give it to me. And I was trying to like while you were talking, I was like, oh, did I ever just use people for like makeouts and stuff like that? Like, yes, I definitely did.
It's not solely restricted to men. I think.
No. Concept. I'm just curious if like more women feel this way, but we just like don't really talk about it. You know?
Yeah, because it's kind of what we talked about earlier. The woman is a status symbol for men a lot of times. Like a man being with a really attractive woman makes the woman look good. And I think along that same line, there's more status that comes from a guy like bragging about women, because it gives off, I think, maybe the primal signal to other men that this guy must be like an alpha male.
So cool.
Like, look how cool he is. He slept with all these women, or like he's with all these women, and him talking about how comfortable he is comes across as a positive. Yeah. Whereas I'm not totally sure because I'm not a woman, but it feels like for women they get called a slut.
Yeah, it's like the opposite.
Yeah,
it's like a long time ago, all the women decided that if we let other women have sex, the men will want them more than they want us. So we need to slut shame them so that they do not want to have sex, so that we can all have an equal fair chance at all the men.
Yeah, exactly. Even if I don't want to have sex with anyone, now no one can.
I'm having sex, no one is.
I was just thinking of the difference between someone bragging about being with lots of women and someone showing that they've been with lots of women. You know what I mean? Like show versus tell when it comes to narrative. But rather than when people brag about having lots of women, I feel like it's almost exactly the opposite phenomenon. Where you're like, why did you bring this up? You're obviously trying to prove something, and it's not working for anyone here. Whereas like, if you were at the club or the bar and there's a guy who's just surrounded with ladies and they're all trying to talk to him or whatever, you'd be like, okay, that guy's got it. I don't know what it is. Something primal in me is like, I should stay away from him because he's going to snatch up everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I was just thinking about that.
It's kind of interesting.
Like, how do I become friends with that guy?
Yeah. There's like, I watched this video a while ago that was talking about like women in media and like why they're mean to each other, like the mean girl trope. And it was talking about how women being mean to each other is actually like patriarchal influences, because men want the women to not like each other so that they can single them out and have them and kind of own them, instead of like John Tucker Must Die situation where they're like, you're dating him, and they all gang up
on him.
And it's like in men's best interest to isolate women from each other. It was really interesting.
I think it probably depends on the man specifically.
Yeah. It's just generalization. And I think the movie it was talking about was like Mean Girls, where no, it wasn't Mean Girls.
But John Tucker Must Die makes sense.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that terrible movie we saw with Jennifer Lopez. Second Act. Where her and Vanessa Hudgens are like mean to each other the whole time.
Yeah.
And how they kind of make fun of it in Isn't It Romantic? Remember? Where it's like, we're actually good friends and coworkers, who cares? And then when she enters into the rom-com version of the world, her best friend hates her.
Yeah, they're like really rude to each other.
I think it's, I don't know, it just seems like bad writing in general.
Well, it's just writing women like it's writing characters like they're stereotypical instead of a real person.
And it's writing it from the male perspective, like you were just saying, that like, this is a masculine ideal to have them fight against each other, because women don't grow up. What?
Don't tell anybody. They're
gonna start making all sorts of groups. We can't have this.
It's said something kind of interesting. In that, I watched a different video from the same channel that was talking.
Which one? Lindsay Ellis or?
It's like, it's either watchmojo.com or
I
The
watch
Taco.
tons of those.
Yeah,
I watch it
yeah.
all the time.
I love Watch Mojo.
They have a lot of cool, like, really, like, breakdowns of movies and stuff. But it was also talking about the mean girl trope and about how women don't have an avenue for rage. And so these mean girls in this movie, you take their rage out on other people who they deem lesser, and because there's not another avenue for it. Whereas like traditionally masculine things like sports, I mean, like even if you just look at like women's lacrosse and men's lacrosse, you're not allowed to hit each other. Men's lacrosse, it's brutal. You just like you break people's collarbones and stuff like
that.
Not
on purpose.
But there's just not an avenue for women to let that out. And so sometimes it comes out in bullying other women.
Do you think that ever comes out in like domestic abuse from woman to man?
I think it does, and I think we don't talk about it very much because it's not like traditional.
Well, and also the whole men aren't expendable thing too, where it's like you can't handle your wife. What a loser. Whereas if the reverse situation, it's like you hit your wife. Wait, you got a wife, and now you're screwing this up. You're out. Throw him in jail.
Like
kill him.
There's 10 dudes for every woman.
Yeah, and they're all waiting. Like you can't be smacking her around. Where the reverse is like, you pussy. Like, it's really weird because like our society doesn't really rely on that anymore, and we don't need more children. We're good. Like. You know what I mean?
Stop
it's like
having children.
When the reverse after what was the Industrial Revolution, where children stopped being an asset and started being a detriment. Yeah, that's where we are now, where it's like it's not cost effective to have children. Right, you're not making farm hands. You're making hungry mouths that are gonna just like weigh you down.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting too is that you're right. It's swung from children are assets. We need children because like. We're self-sufficient. We live on a farm. We feed ourselves.
Right. And we have to be able to fight off wolves or other people.
Right. And it swung. And I mean, it kind of like peaked at like, well, we can still have kids work in factories. Yeah. And then all of a sudden now we don't. And so now you're right. Kids are like a financial liability. But what's interesting is now we're swinging so far. Most people don't think about this, but actually a lot of countries in the world have aging populations.
Because they don't have kids.
Because of that. And so, like, they have all kinds of programs now in countries. I watched a documentary about it in one of my classes. I think it was in Japan, where they are, like, trying to pay you to have kids. And they go through all of these different things because
you don't know how
the Japanese workforce in 20 years, there's going to be no young people that are going to take care of the old people because they're not having enough kids.
So you have to incentivize them to have kids again because now they're like, please have kids.
No, and it's like, I think a lot bigger of a problem in a lot more places than most people think.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, we don't really see a lot of that here.
No.
Specifically Utah, but also the American Midwest is all pretty kid-full. But that...
Kid-full.
I don't know. There's a large rural population there as well, so you can they become assets again.
No, that's true.
Like when we went to that county fair in Indiana, remember that? And the whole thing was about like convincing people to become farmers.
What?
Yeah. It was kind of weird.
Like
to me.
How big is your pig or how big is your pumpkin?
Yeah, but it was also like there were these huge displays of like, this is how much money the government will give you for a grant, and like corn farming is the way of the future, and like pictures of these cool, successful farmers.
How much was it?
A lot, because nobody wants to be a farmer. But yeah, and then how big is your pig? Here's prizes for people who are staying in the agricultural community and farming because we need this. We can't keep importing food from China.
Yeah.
I don't want
to do it. I'm the sound engineer.
No, sound engineer, do it or don't. It makes me think of what is that movie with Matthew McConaughey? Interstellar?
Yes.
When they like need farmers because they don't have enough people to.
Oh yeah, and he's food. Like he's an astronaut and he has to become a corn farmer because there's just not enough people taking it up.
I wonder if that kind of thing would happen. I mean, even now, you look at the government, you talk about like the free market and, you know, if not enough people are doing it, then the price that will pay for it goes up. You know, like you can be a pooper scooper in San Francisco and make like $100,000 or something because it's like no one will do it. And so like the more demand there is and the fewer people that want to do it, the more we'll charge for it. But it seems like with certain things that still doesn't really work. Like with farmers, the demand is huge, but they don't really make enough money and it's really hard. And so like demand itself hasn't been able to pay farmers more.
Well, they've been trying to incentivize them with like
government subsidies and stuff like that. It's just interesting to think that, you know, like, I don't know. What's the future of that?
We need farmers and we need garbage people and plumbers and things that like are not glamorous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need someone to do it. And if no one will do it, then we'll pay people even more, which is why people that do, for example, like construction can make a ton of money because no one wants to do it.
It's dangerous. Or not sales, like knocking doors sucks, but they'll pay through the nose because they can't get people to do it.
Yeah.
Well, and that kind of like full circle back to I did my part. I got my job. Where's my woman? You know?
Oh, yeah.
Because even if it's like not a job that is glamorous or great, even if it's paying well.
Right. You think, or editorial you, the man in this situation says to himself, okay, you know what? I finished high school. Where's my woman? Nothing. I did a vocational school. Where is she? Now I'm working as a plumber every day of my life. And I remember watching Leave It to Beaver and seeing the commercials on TV that show the good, hardworking dad and his wife and his 2 kids in their house. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I want this. Give it to me now. I've done everything.
Oh, that was something else that I've been thinking about lately is like the traditional 1950s, like nuclear. Yeah, nuclear.
Yeah.
I'm always like, I don't want to say nuclear.
Nuclear?
Nuclear. The nuclear family. I don't know if I said it right.
Nuclear.
I heard it stop. But it's talking just about their like relationship as a family. Because we went and saw The Christmas Story, the musical, with our friend around Christmas time. Mm-hmm. And like a big part of that was how afraid the children were of their father and how much they could confide in their mother and like trust her to help them get to where they need to be or help ease a blow with their father. Like if they did something wrong, they would tell their mother and then their mother would tell it to their father over a steak dinner or something like that. Right. Like it's kind of interesting to see like that kind of idealized situation was actually kind of unhealthy and I mean
like what kind of terrible tyrant
like
was
I have
father
a good relationship with my dad. Like I'd be sad if I didn't have a good relationship with my dad, and I feel like you guid have really good relationship.
I feel like I was definitely afraid of my dad growing up though.
But I was also afraid of my mom.
My mom was twice as bad. No, but like I think it's good for children to have at least a semi-healthy fear of authority.
Yeah,
because then if they shed that fear of authority too early in their life, it's another problem of motivating people to be contributing members of society. Like if you're 14 years old and you suddenly realize that the teachers at the school really can't do anything to you and just stop doing everything, and then they'll be like, do your homework. No.
What are you
going to do? Send me home where I'm not going to do my homework? Like once you figure that out, there's no reason to do anything unless you already have a personal drive. Mm-hmm. And so it's, I think, better in the long run for society for children to shed their fear of authority later in their life.
Well, we know people, just like our friend, I guess. Who she lost her fear of authority when she was like 6 years old.
Because her mom she was adopted by somebody else, but then she would go visit her mom. And her mom would give her candy and toys and video games and say, you don't have to follow the rules. There's no bedtimes.
Don't do your homework. You don't have to go to school.
So and so she learned that she was like, wait a second. My mom lets me do all this stuff. All these other authority people are full of crap.
Yeah. I don't have to do any
of
this.
And then she dropped out of high school.
Yeah.
And just smokes weed and works at Taco Bell, I think.
Yeah. It's just like, it's a bad time to lose your fear of authority because then you just kind of screw off and don't do anything.
I mean, in general.
Like,
depending on the child, because there's plenty of kids who I feel find their motivation and like internally deep inside, they're like, you know what? I want to be the smartest kid in my class, and that's what I want. But yeah, if you look at the general population and find someone who isn't particularly motivated, then it's probably good for them to be scared of their dad and punishment and scared of the teachers or being sent to the principal or breaking the law, because they'll stay in line long enough to do themselves the best benefit. It's like a security versus freedom kind of argument. Yeah. Because like you have security in your house as a child underneath your parents' roof where they have rules and discipline. Mm-hmm. And in school you have rules and discipline, and then you get out into the world and it's like, oh, I have all this freedom and I also have the freedom to fail miserably. Yeah. But if I have a good enough like starting off point and developing habits and doing good things for myself, like getting good grades, then it'll be a lot easier on myself to get out into the world.
I've seen that there's a sweet spot between like too dependent and too independent. And I've seen both in my friends as they've grown up, where probably too dependent is worse. Yeah. Yeah. You know, like if you're like the coddled little kid who your parents do everything for you and you have no internal drive, then you become an adult and then you're just like kind of hope that people do that.
30-year-old dude sitting on the couch at your mom's house. Like,
I do think though that there are too many parents that are so afraid of that they do the opposite.
They like push like, too hard.
Yeah, like you have to pay rent.
Like Weston Bucks.
Weston Bucks, yeah.
Can we say that?
Yeah, we can say that. I don't think he's a subscriber.
He suddenly is on the internet like, hey, what the heck?
I'm talking about my house. Like an hour into this video.
It's like he's such a devout subscriber that he listened this far. But like,
like I've seen your kids' rent.
I've seen that before too, where they suffocate the childhood experience kind of, because I feel like you need to give them enough of a cushion that they have the freedom to want to experience things and to imagine and to explore and be like, I don't need to worry about whether or not I have a meal today, so I can imagine things and like be playful and be a kid.
Yeah.
Because if they're so worried and if they feel the responsibility at too young of an age for their own life in too many ways, I found it's harder for them to be creative, for them to be imaginative. But then also the opposite is like, no, we want to nurture your creativity. So like, you don't ever have to get a job.
No bedtime.
Like, we don't want to like quench your childlike wonder.
So you don't need to learn math.
Yeah, you don't need to wear pants. And like,
but it's true, you know, there's the kid who like wears a cape and a top hat to school and his parents are like, he's so creative, he's so unique. And it's like
he doesn't learn.
Some of this needs to be quashed.
Yeah, like we need to ruin his dreams
we need
a little
to smash his dreams a little bit, make him fit in.
You can't be anything.
Well, there's that thing. It's like a specific, it's not a phenomenon, just like a thing that you should do with your kids, where instead of telling them that they are smart, tell them that they're good at working hard. So like,
you're the replacing the compliments thing you were telling me about.
Yeah.
Where you replace compliments with things that they didn't do anything for with things that they did. So like instead of saying, "Oh, you are so pretty," it's like, "Wow, you worked really hard on that outfit. Looks great."
Yeah.
Or like, you instead of saying, "Oh, you're so smart. You're just naturally smart." It's like, "You worked really hard, and I can tell on this project turned out awesome."
And like they've done studies that kids who have that kind of environment of I worked hard and I got this result are less like entitled as an adult and generally succeed as an adult more often because they know that they have to work hard for something instead of it just coming to them naturally. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting.
I think it's useful because I've seen it in like the kids that I babysit and they want to quit something instantly. If they're not instantly good at it, they're like, "Oh, I don't want to." I
guess this isn't my thing.
Yeah, and so I think that does come a little bit from like their parents or their family saying like, "Oh, you're so smart and you're so talented and stuff." But I think it also comes from like just being a kid too, because I remember when I was a kid and I was like, "Oh, if I'm not good at something, like I don't want to do it. I'm going to be so embarrassed," you know. Where I feel like it's a good lesson to teach kids that like. You're not going to be instantly good at like most things
really
in
anything.
Life.
Well, I was just that same like healthy fear of authority thing. I was thinking about piano lessons when we were kids.
Yeah.
Our parents made us do piano, but I never practiced. Who cares? And now I can't play the piano. It's like if I had been more afraid of them and listened better and pushed through things just because I wasn't immediately good at it, I could have more skills set up today.
Yeah.
Well, I think so much more, and this is a theory, but I think I have a lot of evidence.
Yeah.
Is I think so much more of what we call natural talent and natural tendency is actually something else.
Huh.
Like, for example, people, like when I was a kid, everyone always told me that I was naturally good at sports.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I wasn't naturally good at sports. I just was really good at practicing a lot more than the other kids. And I, like, when I started my first sport, which was baseball, I was like the worst one in the league. And then I practiced a lot, and so I was good. And then from that point on, I had like hand-eye coordination, right? Because I was good at that. So it made me like better at ping pong, you know, than the other little kids. And like, oh, you're just like naturally good at this. And actually, if you trace that back, it's like, well, actually, there's no part of this that I was naturally good at. My only natural advantage was the fact that I had more desire to practice than the other kids.
But what about like, I mean, that's the nature versus nurture argument. But
Right.
what about like the Michael Jordan syndrome?
Michael Jordan's a perfect example. So
Well,
Michael Jordan
Practice like crazy, right?
and wasn't even the best player at the beginning of his college. I mean, college is like some people. That's
What I'm trying to say about
That's
it is
where
that
you
like
peak.
yeah, and
There's-
he wasn't even the best player on his college team when he started.
there's like 3 different categories of effectiveness at something.
Mhm.
And there's one where you're naturally gifted, and there's one where you work really hard, but then there's a middle one where you're both. Where
Right.
It's like these
Sure.
naturally gifted kids who don't work hard are the bottom rung because they're going to burn out after they run out of their talent.
Uh-huh.
And these kids who work hard can get really, really high because they're going to keep practicing no matter what.
Right.
But these kids who are naturally gifted and practice are going to end up higher than the kids who are just hardworking because they've given inherent genetic qualities that make them better at basketball or baseball or
Right.
something in their mindset or something that came from their nature and not their nurture is giving them just that little bit of edge. But they could be here and quit, but instead they practice like crazy.
I completely agree, and I believe in natural talent. I think that it exists. I just think that we give more credit to some just innate, inherited, natural ability, where what we see as natural is only partially natural.
Right.
And we accredit a lot more of what we see as natural to that ability when in fact it's something totally different. Like take math, for example. You take 2 kids and one of them is super good at math and one of them is slower at math. And it's their first day. So you're like, okay, well, this kid is obviously naturally talented and this kid is not as talented. But if he works hard, you know, they can maybe even out. Like we'll see how much their work ethic is. But if you backtrack it, it's not necessarily that they're good at math. It's most likely that they have longer attention span, which is actually a much higher indicator of math proficiency than just math proficiency itself. It actually talks about that in Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point.
Oh yeah, okay.
He talks about like the mystery of why are Asian countries so much better at math than the United States. And one of the things that he says is, one, it's cultural because they focus a lot more on like attention growing activities in their culture, and hard work is a little bit more stressed. And 2 is their language, because in like Chinese and Japanese, it's only like a syllable or something for a long complex number. I mean, I don't know, I don't speak Chinese, but it's much easier to remember.
Oh.
And so they're much like those types of little advantages where they kind of have a culture where they cultivate longer attention spans, a little bit more like focused on working through problems than other countries, as well as it's easier for them to remember numbers because they're shorter, makes you believe that they're naturally gifted. So like it was a root somewhere else that's different than just you were born with this.
Yeah,
it's
you're
like,
just good at this.
There's a different cause that we a lot of times don't really attribute. Like the whole tipping point is 100% about that. It's super interesting.
I was just thinking about, what is the name of that phenomenon that they talk about in Arrival?
Like the language.
Yeah, like
I can't remember what it's called.
Wolfhauser, something like that. Where it's talking about like your ability to comprehend and relate to reality is based off of the language that you know.
Oh yeah.
And so like if you are exposed to a different language, then you have a completely different conception of what is real. Like for an example, I don't know if this is a good one, but romantic languages are gendered. Like in Spanish, you have the table is a woman, la mesa,
Right.
and the door is a woman.
Yeah.
But like, the town is a man, el pueblo, and everything is kind of cut and dry, binary into this. And so the concept of transgender or what's the word I'm looking for? Non-binary individuals is probably extremely difficult to grasp in a world where referentially your language is already separating everything into just two.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like the Chinese thing, which is their characters are also symbolic as well as phonetic and writing. It adds a whole other level to how they can perceive the world. And maybe has a big part of the attention span thing. I
completely agree with that, and I've noticed that even in Portuguese. When I'm speaking in Portuguese, I always assumed I grabbed a Starburst at the wrong time. I always assumed that learning a language would be like, I might have told you guys this analogy before, but like most people, I thought it was like, here's my bag of English and has every word I know and every concept I know, like, okay, tree, wall, TV, couch, whatever. Mm-hmm. And here's my bag of Portuguese, and I just have to fill it with all these things. And it's like, okay, so tree, okay, árvore, all right, got it. And then like, okay, so I'll think in English, make this English, and then like, oh, find what matches it. Okay, now I've got Portuguese, and then they're like equal.
Yeah.
But it's actually not that at all. It's very surprising to me to realize that Portuguese is essentially like, no, get rid of the English bag. Don't use that anymore. We have a totally different bag that you can't even translate. And you're like, well, how can you not translate it? And we try, and there's like similar sentiments. Yeah. But that's why it's a different language. It's not English with different sounds. It's like you're speaking something that doesn't mean anything to the other part of your brain. Like there's words that they have in Portuguese that they don't have a translation for in English.
They don't exist.
Yeah.
Like the word saudade. They say, I feel saudade. And what we would say is, I miss you. That's what it means. Mm-hmm. But the word saudade is its own feeling. It's an emotion
separate from
that we don't have. They're like, I'm feeling the emotion that's called saudade. And we try to replace it with other words like longing. They have a word for longing. Or, like distance or whatever. I miss you. That's all I can say. Like but they actually have an emotion for that.
The Greek words of love example that is tossed around, like philios, eros, and pathos, where they all mean different things, but we in English have just said love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I love my grandma and I love coffee.
Yeah, but they're very different in a different language.
I do love coffee and I love my grandma. So to me, they're kind of the same. So that's not a great example.
They both kind of wake me up in the morning.
They're both brown.
A lot of the time imported.
I was just thinking about in Parasite, that movie, we were reading the trivia and it was saying that when the rich people are talking to like their servants, they are using a different like informal form of Korean or something like that. Like in Spanish, it's like nosotros
ustedes versus
vosotros.
Ellos, yeah.
Yeah.
My friend was telling me I actually watched that with my friend who served a mission in Korea and with his sound designer. Forgot about that. And his girlfriend is from Korea. She's Korean. And so we watched that with them and they talked a lot about that. They talked about how much more strict it is in Korean, the language.
Well, and there's a couple examples in the movie that they mention in the trivia where like the daughter is speaking back to the mom in that informal, like they're equals. Uh-huh. And that's kind of what wows her about her as the art tutor because she's like, oh my gosh, this girl is stepping well above her station. She must be amazing.
Yeah.
Whereas like when the dad, Mr. Park and Mr. Kim are both like dressed as Indians standing in the bush. Mm-hmm. He's saying like, hey, it'll be fun. We're going to come out as Indians. And that's all like kind of buddy. And then Mr. Kim says like, oh, right. Because you love your wife, right? And he like immediately snaps into the formal, which is like, you are my underling. and we'll pay you extra for this. But it's like this weird nuance in language that we don't have in English.
Yeah. Or like the Mr. Kim is like, oh, we're equals. And that's why he snaps into that
right,
formal.
and shuts him down and makes sure that they're not equals.
And I wonder if that, again, going full circle, is why we're very materialistic as a nation, because we don't have language to automatically show our status.
Oh.
So we need something else.
Yeah, so it's like, I drive a Rolls Royce, so it's obvious that I'm higher status than you.
I thought that was a watch for a second, and I was like,
No.
you can't drive a Rolls Royce.
And also,
No,
I don't
it's
actually drive a
Rolex.
Rolls Royce. That was an example. I drive a Honda Civic. So I'm the pygmy in the situation.
I mean, I think that there still is a certain kind of distinction in language between classes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But a lot of that, I think, has to do with where you're from,
Yeah.
like your culture.
I feel like it's a lot more subtle in English, too.
And there's like the obvious examples, like sir, or madam.
Man,
And
or,
like
miss.
dude.
Yeah, but that
Bro.
has more to do maybe with just situation than status. Like,
Well-
you can call your boss if he's higher status than you, but he's not your boss anymore. You can say like, hey man.
Yeah, but like think about how weird or jarring it is when you're like at a restaurant and normally the waiter would be like, okay, sir, what can I get for you? Something like that. And they're like, hey, bro, how's it
So,
going?
dog?
Or like, and for you, boss, what can I get for you? Or hey, bud, what are you looking for? And it's like, no.
I'm in charge. But if I can't be in charge of my own home, I'm at least in charge of the Chuckarama.
But like it's kind of true though, because like there's not an informal relationship between like a server and the diner,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
especially in tipping culture, which is its own whole thing, where it's like this is a very strained, very formal interaction where you just bring the food and don't talk.
Yeah.
And if you can break the barrier like just in the right way, like they talk about in Parasite, where Mr. Park is talking about how Mr. Kim is really good at getting really close to the line but never crossing it
Mm-hmm.
in like the informal, disrespectful behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your waiter were to come and like sit down at the table and hold the baby and chat, like it would be super strange.
Yeah.
Whereas you also don't want a waiter who's just like
Cold.
and cut and dry. But most people would prefer that than someone who's too familiar. Like entering into their meal space, especially if they're with family, is a weird breach in protocol.
I feel like I see that more and more, though.
And our culture is moving away from it, I think.
Yeah. Or like I don't call my boss Mr. or Mrs. I call them by their first names. Or like in college, a lot of the time you call your teachers by their first names.
But in
too.
high school, you generally don't, because unless they're the cool teacher.
Yeah.
But then
It usually backfires.
they lose points a lot of the time. Yeah,
They're
in
like,
the kids'
come
eyes.
on, man. Like, can we
Come
take
on.
the test next week?
Come
Yeah.
on, Rick.
Come on, Rick, big Rick. Come on, cool Rick.
Whereas,
Big ol' Rick.
whereas like when they call them like Mr. Hudson, it's like Mr. Payne. Like it's a very, very like formal, like you are in charge and we are your supplicants.
Mm-hmm.
But then college, it's a lot more, or at least in liberal arts college, it's a lot more open form, free flowing. Whereas like in the military, if you don't say like drill sergeant or gunnery sergeant or whatever, you get docked or get in trouble or demerits or push-ups.
I wonder what the sweet spot is with that, with output, like productivity versus creativity. Because the two examples you just gave, like the most productive people in the world are like military people.
Yeah.
Because it's like we need to do this at this exact time.
Obey
we literally have an
to the
army
line.
of people that are going to accomplish this goal. But they're not the most creative. Not to say that they're uncreative. I don't really know.
I mean, one guy creative at the top, really, and everyone else should just listen.
Right. And in a lot of ways, it's designed that way because it's like we can't have everyone making different decisions in this specific, tactical moment.
Mm.
Like you have to follow protocol. Like we can't be running different directions. But liberal arts colleges, probably if you were to try and find, are they as productive as in, do they have the same amount of output? Depends on your definition, but they're for sure more creative.
Mm.
And I wonder if having those loose barriers and feeling like you can say things without, because you can't say everything
Like
to authority
consequences,
without
yeah.
consequence. I wonder if that affects how creative you can be. Like you can be over disciplined to the point where it hinders your creativity.
As much as those two entities are also like really different sides of the spectrum, I think that they probably don't consciously recognize it, but it's a symbiotic relationship. They need each other. Where it's like, without the military guys to follow the rules, there's no room for the creative guys to explore and change stuff.
Because they have to worry about being safe in
right.
everyday life.
Like we're talking about little kids.
But without the creative side of things, then this becomes a dull, boring, horrible life of just following the rules and sticking to the line. So they like kind of feed off each other. And I think as far as most people in the world should probably aim for the middle somewhere.
You should do that in your own life, in my opinion.
Right.
Because like, yeah, if you try to be the creative and your only like output is creativity at the expense of your foundation, like your security, your safety, your finances, then you won't be able to be creative because you'll be worrying about that.
Well, and think about how many creative types you personally know, but just like from history, are unstable individuals who can't really function in society. They have a manager to do that. Right. Or they commit suicide young, or they get really into drugs. They cannot function on a efficient level very well, but are hyper creative.
So when order and chaos meet, order and chaos meet is kind of where discipline and creativity meet, which is where you get like the hyper efficient, successful people. It seems like
Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan, I think, is an excellent example of someone who has hit both sides very well, where he comes out with very creative new ideas that are beautifully filmed, beautifully written, blockbusters, extremely efficient, well marketed, well thought out, budgeted correctly. But like your extreme indie filmmaker isn't going to be able to do that side of it. And then on the reverse, your Hollywood executive is going to be like, I don't know.
What's the budget? Like,
I follow this formula and I put out sequels and prequels and whatever, and they're garbage.
Yeah. Well, I think he probably has the other brain. Like, I don't think it's just him being like, how do I make this into a blockbuster? Because he writes movies with his brother. So I wonder if his brother is like the other
I was thinking also Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah.
Despite like him being relatively formulaic, he puts out so much content that it's clear that he is very good at this side of things. But then his stuff is creative and interesting enough that it gets to the middle point. Whereas like George R.R. is so inefficient.
George R.R. Martin.
Yes. he is so inefficient. Over here, he can't write a book in 11 years. But his books are excellent.
Right.
And they're all over the place. Like they're not very well like cut and dry and organized. Which is what you don't want that in your creatives.
You see that in good partnerships as well, like Walt and Roy Disney.
Yeah.
Walt Disney was...
I thought you were going to say Walt and Jesse.
Walt and Jesse, also a great partnership. One of them is just like the stern authority. And
the other one is an idiot. Science, bitch.
What about a magnet? That's so funny. No, that's not the route I was going to take.
Walt and Roy Disney.
That's so funny. Yeah, Walt and Roy Disney. I just watched a documentary about Disney, and it's super interesting because Walt is the creative, the dreamer, the like eccentric, and then Roy is the finance guy. And so Roy is, and there's actually a whole book about that called Start With Why by Simon Sinek, about how there's always a why guy, and then they need a how guy right behind them. And the how guy almost never gets the credit that the why guy gets.
I saw his TED Talk.
Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, or Bill Gates and whatever that other guy's name is. See, I don't even remember his name. What is his name?
Bob Gates?
No, the other guys.
They're not brothers.
I don't know who else started Microsoft. I couldn't tell you.
All I know
Jeff
is
Bezos and the
But
internet.
like Steve Jobs, or I mean Jeff Bezos and the interwebs. And then you usually find the guy who's the creative, who's eccentric, who's confident, and who's like a visionary. And they're the why guy. Like, why are we doing this? Like, how is the world going to be better because of my ideas? And then the other guy's like, okay, let me write that down. All right. And how do we actually make that happen?
Yeah. How do we figure this out?
It's like real world application is super difficult for the theoretician or the creative to do. But it's absolutely necessary if you want to make your product into anything.
Well, and it's kind of interesting to think about, are those people who are just the creative side and don't have that other side, are they valuable to society, you know?
Or a reverse. Well, actually, no, never mind.
No,
The
those other
efficient
people are valuable.
IRS agents, military,
very quantifiably valuable
Right.
to society.
Inherently,
Yeah.
I think we need 10 to 1.
I feel like you need both, but it's like, do you let these people do whatever they want? Like, do as many drugs as they want, or like not pay for anything in their life, or like.
And how many of these burnout creatives are nothing? But how many of them are like Pablo Picasso?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's like, do we as a society create enough of a network and like support system that we can hold up a bunch of people who cannot function in everyday society in the hopes that someone will be this genius like Van Gogh or...
Yeah.
Because a lot of these artists die poor and unknown, and then their genius comes out later because there was no one there to catch them and make sure they didn't do that.
Well, what's kind of interesting to think about is like Van Gogh as an example, like died without ever selling a painting. And now there's like so many systems in check that could stop you from dying on the street, like the welfare system or your parents or a different support system where you could just be like, yeah, I'm going to be an artist. And they're going to be like, of course, here you go. Here's how you go.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's not quite as common for people to just be starving.
There's also the question of a state of emergency.
Yeah.
Without a state of emergency, a lot of people don't get kicked into gear. So it's like if you have your parents and your safety net and you're like, oh, I want to be an artist, but I'll go to art school next year. I'm happy here. My friends are here. I like kind of screwing around. I paint every once in a while and it just keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And then eventually you're not good or you don't have anything to say. Whereas like if you're on the streets starving and you have to make a painting, like what is that quote from Walk the Line? You can sing one song. Mm-hmm. You're dying in a ditch in a gutter or whatever, and that's the only song that people are going to hear. Then your work has so much more power. Mm. And like the creativity behind it, it comes from a different place than someone who is very comfortable and lived their entire life. Yeah. And decided to become an artist.
I feel like most creativity comes from despair and like sadness.
Or at least pain.
Yeah.
Conflict.
And productivity as well. Like,
yeah.
I think the urgency. Grant Cardone is a guy that I read his book. He's a really, really famous salesman and very successful like real estate guy. And he said he was not really a very good salesman until one day, for whatever reason, he bought like this huge truckload of fish and the fish was frozen. And I guess he didn't know that. And his plan was to like buy this fish and sell them over like the next little while. And he'd never done that before. And he realized when he bought it that as soon as they thawed, they couldn't sell them. He had no way to keep them frozen. Mm. And so he is all of a sudden like, I'm going to lose all my money because I bought all this fish thinking I had, all this time. Now I have to sell them all today. And I think your mind kind of fills in the blanks when it realizes it's up against the wall. So he sold all of them and he kind of realized he's really good at sales and now he's super famous.
But also, it depends on the person, too. There's so many people who, when in that situation, would be like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to sell anything. Exactly. I'll just go sit in my room and cry about my misfortune.
Like eating fish in tears.
Well, I was just thinking about that.
Fish again.
That childhood thing. I mean, not just nature versus nurture, but that's part of it. Mm-hmm. Where it's like if your child is inherently someone who quits when they come across something difficult and you could never instill in them something otherwise, then when they're pushed up against the wall, they're going to quit.
Right.
And think it's okay. But after a certain point, you can't quit. Like, you can't just like, oh, I just won't get a job. It's like, okay, well, no one's here to help you anymore. Your family is dead. Like, you're an adult man. You're going to live on the streets. Whatever is going to happen to you is going to happen to you now. There's no one else to keep picking up the slack when you fail.
It was amazing to me how fast I got a job once I needed one. Like, my entire high school, I didn't have a job. Mom and dad were always kind of like, yeah, get a job. You should probably get one. And I didn't really feel like I needed one. And I was probably right. They paid for stuff and my friends paid for stuff and everything. And then as soon as I moved out and the family moved across the country, I was by myself. Immediately, it's like your brain kind of knows what to do. It just was not really trying. And as soon as it really thinks that, oh, we actually have to do this. This is no longer like us pretending to try and find a job. we need one or else we can't buy food. All of a sudden I went and got a job in, a couple days because it was so urgent.
Yeah.
That's something really frustrating when it comes to creative types, though, because how much easier would it be to write your next award-winning song if you're comfortably in your parents' basement with them paying for the bills and not having to worry about that? But you don't do it. There's no pressure. And so not until you're like on the street starving that you decide to try to make this happen.
And I feel like that's maybe some of the problems that come along with like millennial generation or Gen Z is not having that motivation. And when they are, and I mean, I'm a millennial too, but like when you are backed into that corner, it's like, oh, okay, it's over then. I'm done.
Never mind.
Like, never mind. It's fine, and you, instead of there is no option but success, like failure is just like, okay, I give up, you know? I feel like it's a lot more socially acceptable to be like, well, I didn't like it, so I stopped. And it's like, well, I guess you don't have to eat because you have your support system. You know, like you're not, I feel like the stakes aren't as high most of the time.
Yeah. Just good and bad. Like we feel like it's good from a humane perspective.
Yeah.
Where it's like, like we want to help these people. Like my son is in college and he doesn't have any money, so I want to send him money so he can survive. And so it's hard because at the same time, you're right. We kind of cripple them in some ways. Yeah. Because then it's like, oh, sweet, every time I fall,
you'll just catch me.
There's actually a governmental term for that between countries. I wish I could remember what it was called. But like when a country knows, and this also applies to banks, that if it does something, that it has a safety net, then it completely changes the entire equation of whether or not they'll do it. So for example, with a bank, if a bank knows that it'll fail, that if it fails, it'll be bailed out like it was in 2008, then all of a sudden they have no motivation to set up systems so that they won't fail the next time. Because they're like, oh wait, 2008, like you bailed us out, sweet. So we're not going to,
so we can lend as much money as we want.
Right. We're not gonna worry so much about giving out bad loans and stuff because that gives us money. And if we fail, like there's a safety net. Yeah. And it actually can be kind of detrimental to people, to institutions, and to countries because they end up failing and the whole system thinks that, and you really can't uphold everyone. And if everyone thinks they have a safety net, like every bank thinks they have a safety net. Like, oh, if we fail, whatever, let's just bail us out.
They'll just bail us out.
We can't bail out everyone,
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why we're in so much national debt right now.
What'd you guys think about being on the podcast for the first time?
It's really fun. I feel like I keep, I'm like, hold still, stay here. But that's okay. You're just a person. You're not a robot. That's true. I'm
I know us. All like squeak in the chair.
You're like drumming your fingers, and I was like,
I know, it's so weird. Like, listen to this.
Sorry.
Ugh.
I know. It's really weird. To all my viewers.
See, there's like ASMR videos where people are like, it's like, you're sick and your boyfriend tucks you in and buys you food and stuff like that. And it's so weird because it's like, hey, babe. You had a really hard day today, too. It's just like so.
It's like weirdly
and
satisfying
people listen
when
to it, like to pretend like that's
yeah. It's like it's like a specific kind of ASMR. I can't remember what it's called, like fantasy ASMR or something.
But if you were very lonely, it's actually kind of cool to put these on, and you can like hear yourself, and it's like almost like a different voice because it's so crisp, and it's like right in your ear. It's like really weird, isn't it? Yeah.
It's like, so crisp.
Oh, it's so strange.
This is awesome.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Cool. Well. Yeah. Thanks for watching.
You need like one of those like little jingles at the end, like
or like
my super short show.